Уважаемый господин президент,
Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, it is a huge honor for us to welcome Nicolas Sarkozy, President of the French Republic in 2007-2012, a man, a politician who is hugely popular in our country. It was a huge pleasure for us when the President accepted our invitation to take part in the forum. Russia and France have already and always been linked by positive emotions, not just political ties and positive sentiment, and even the notorious military campaign of 1812 did not worsen the relations between French society and Russian society still spoke French afterwards. And even when there were tensions, the relations between our countries were always a factor of stability that hindered spikes in tensions. That was the case in 2008 when Nicolas Sarkozy was head of the French Republic. Another example I would like to cite. I will reiterate that there has always been a very warm sentiment between French and Russian nations, and that was back in 2008 and afterwards, and in the context of yesterday's address of President Putin to the Federal Assembly, which bore in particular on constitutional matters. I like to say that a lot has been used from the French Constitution of 1958, which brought General de Gaulle to power. A lot of this constitution was used when Russia's constitution was developed. I'm not going to repeat for you the biography of President Sarkozy. Everyone knows it. We are online, and if you don't mind, we'll begin the conversation. My first question, which certainly corresponds to the topic of the forum, is as follows. What are the key issues, challenges, difficulties of the current decade and, of course, the next decade? Of course, the world is unpredictable, but what are the risks? If we understand the risks, if we analyze, we will be able to mitigate the negative consequences thereof. Do these risks stem from the degradation of the environment, geopolitical tensions, or some other factors? So what are the challenges, the risks, and trends of the forthcoming decade? That is my question. Good morning, everyone. It is always a great pleasure for me to be in Russia. And when I come to Russia, I have this feeling of coming to a country whose culture is European, in essence. And I feel very close to this culture. Well, we have a long history of relations between France, Europe, and Russia. And I understand full well that Russia comes to Europe from Asia, but Europe needs Russia. Whereas Russia, in its turn, is in need of Europe, and our fates are connected. And those people who do not understand this fact, they do not understand either history or geography. That was not your question, but that is my answer. That is the answer to my second question that I was going to ask you. I see one great challenge, a huge one, a colossal one. That is a challenge unprecedented in the history of our planet. That is a challenge no one talks about, and that is that of demography, the demographic challenge, that is. I understand that in Russia, demography is an issue. You are a huge country. And I know that there is a decrease in the population. But the thing is, when I was born, there were 2.5 billion people on the planet. Right now, there is 7.5 billion of people. So it's a huge spike in the population. And right now, over a short time span, the population of the planet increased threefold, and very soon it's gonna be 9 billion. By the end of this century, it's gonna be 11 billion. And in 30 years, in Nigeria, the population is gonna be greater than that of the US. By the end of the century, there will have been more people living on the planet than the planet has seen over the last million years. The challenge of climate, of course, is important. But the challenge of the climate change stems from the demographic challenges. The demographic challenge is the primal cause. You say that Moscow is a huge city, that's true. But Lagos, which incidentally is not even the capital of Nigeria, is a city with a population of 22 million people. Paris only has 2. I believe that is the most enormous challenge. There are others, of course, but the challenge of demography is the greatest one. Africa is very close to us in terms of geography, in terms of other parameters, and in 30 years, its population will have doubled. Right now, Africa houses 1,250,000,000, and it's going to be 2.5 billion. It's a colossal challenge. Right now, the Chinese have abandoned the policy of one child, one policy. And India, as it seems, is already ahead of China in terms of its population size. Asia has 2 countries, that is, with a population of more than 1 billion. And the 4 biggest countries are in Asia in terms of the population size. So as we can see, the axis, as it were, has moved from the west to the east. Of course, as I said, there are other challenges as well. But since I am a disciplined person, a disciplined pupil, well, you asked me about one challenge, and I decided to name the most important challenge. Thank you very much. Given the last address to the Federal Assembly of the President, there is another thing, that is the unevenness of development. And some regions do not have any increase in the population, and it's important to stimulate population growth. And that is because there is a link between economic growth and population growth as well. Mr. President, in terms of technological challenges and issues, I do not limit you to one challenge. Apart from demography, what are other trends and challenges that concern you? Are there ways to mitigate these issues and their negative consequences? Well, to finish on this issue, just imagine that there is not a single international organization which is dedicated to the study of demographic evolution of the planet. I mean, I'm not even talking about an organization that would find a solution to this issue. No, I'm talking about an organization that would at least follow the demographic evolution. Not a single one. Well, as for technological evolution, sometimes I'm astounded and flabbergasted when I see that right now a part of the population do not trust technological progress, whereas I myself believe that technological progress is a formidable potential for humanity. Well, my parents, they watched TV to see the first ever human being walk on the moon. Imagine how technological progress has improved our lives. Right now, however, under the disguise of protecting the environment, which of course is a noble cause, still doubts are being cast upon technological progress. And I think that nations that do not invest in technological progress are not going to be worth much in the world of the 21st century. Progress is not a problem. On the contrary, it's the solution. I don't think that we should get back to the sources, to the primal state. That only would work for animals. And, for salmon that gets back to where it was born. And that it ends badly for salmon because when it gets back to where it is born, it is caught. I said that on many occasions, in particular here in Moscow, for many decades the world was organized around two blocks. On the one hand, the Soviet Union and the United States of America on the other. Afterwards, there was a period of domination of one superpower, that is the United States of America. Right now, however, and that didn't start with Donald Trump, we've got the US that says that the only thing it's interested in is itself. And after that, we've got China. For the first time in the history of humankind, we are going to have a country that is the biggest in terms of demography, in economy and in military. That is, the three factors are going to be combined in one country. And that means that the balance of governance is lost. There is no longer a system that is either managed by two blocks or one single superpower. And we'll see the emergence of superpowers, world powers. Russia in particular has regained its great power status, and that is very good. And it is President Vladimir Putin that is to be credited with that. He managed to get Russia back into the first row of world great powers. His role is uncontestable. We see that Turkey is trying to get back to its Ottoman roots. The Shia and the Sunni are vying between one another in the face of Iran and Arab countries, Saudi Arabia. Europe is being polarized politically and it's being fragmented and it is getting weaker because fragmentation and divisions always bring about weakness. So why am I saying this? We've got institutions that date back to the 20th century, whereas we are living in the 21st century. We do not have the necessary institutions that would be able to govern the planet efficiently. Let me cite a very simple example. There is not a single African country that would have a permanent status in the UN Security Council. India is not a permanent member. There is not a single Latin American country that would be a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and they've got a huge population, more than 1 billion. Japan, which is one of the greatest powers in the world, is not a permanent member. So how can the UN Security Council be expected to govern, to manage the planet in the 21st century? So we have to understand there is a new picture and we need our institutions to embrace the new realities, and that is a huge challenge that needs to be addressed. Thank you very much, Mr. President. My second question, a follow-up to the first one. President de Gaulle, who was hugely popular in Russia just as he was in France, he spoke the famous dictum about Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. Right now we say Europe from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from Lisbon to Vladivostok. 25 years ago, it seemed that it was a future within our grasp. It seemed that we would create one single European space with 4 freedoms. That is something everyone spoke. President Putin was speaking about that in the early noughties. Europeans supported this idea as well. Right now we see divisions and this idea seems impossible. But we remember that in the beginning of the 20th century, everyone was speaking about a single Europe, but then there were 2 world wars. But afterwards, single Europe did happen. So sometimes it takes a lot of time to get back flesh to come into practice. So my question is, what are the prospects for one single Europe from the Atlantic to the Pacific? And in that case, what role do relations between Russia and France play? It is easier to ask a question than give an answer. However, I've got an idea. First, I believe deeply in Europe, as do we. Wait for the next part. Of all the continents, the one that has been most barbaric, most brutal, most violent, it is Europe. The most terrible wars were not in Asia or in Africa. The most terrible wars happened in Europe and not in the Middle Ages, in the 20th century. The greatest number of people were killed in war in Europe and in the 20th century too. The place where millions of Jews were exterminated, it was not in the Middle East. It was located in Europe, and this is something one has to keep in mind. If one doesn't put this in context, then one won't be able to understand it. And miraculously, the most brutal continent has turned out to be the most peaceful, thanks to the European Union. Europe has brought peace to the continent that had never known anything but war. And I would never accept anyone who denounces Europe, who denigrates it. But the thing is, Europe is a pluralistic Europe. A Europe which is single, which is, however, composed in different parts, of pluralistic parts that function differently. Yes, Europe is going to move towards greater integration. But now, however, we see some trends towards less integration. Let's take the Europe of Schengen. It managed to address the immense issue of immigration policy. There is Europe of defense. And last but not least, I want there to be a new international organization above Europe. First, Europe of the Euro, then the Union, and something above it, a new international organization. I propose that it should be established. This organization would consist of 3 founding members: Europe, Russia, and Turkey. 3 founding members for this organization. And this new organization, as is my idea, will have to address the issues of security and economy. And with this new mechanism, you'll have a new forum, a new organization, which will make it possible to talk about a single space from the Atlantic to Lake Baikal. Because as far as I understand, Lake Baikal is just 1 hour away from Beijing, and it's 5 hours away from Moscow. So it'll bring things together. And of course, one has to be creative. We need this 145 million Russians, whereas Russians are in need of 500 million Europeans. Incidentally, I was against Turkey's accession to the European Union. But Mr. Roland had a different opinion on the subject. But it's not that I said that Turkey is not a European power because Turkey is in Asia. No. This is a great civilization, a great nation. So maybe after we get these 3 founding members at one negotiating table, Turkey, Europe, and Russia, one would think about others like Ukraine or Georgia, countries that are blocked from entering into NATO or the European Union during my time as president. I think that the 21st century has to be that of new ideas, not a century of ideas long past. Thank you very much. Indeed, this is very important. This is a new, spectacular idea. Now, turning to the European Union and the form it took at the end of the 20th century. Right now there is a huge discussion according to which a single monetary policy should be complemented by a single fiscal policy. Madame Lagarde mentioned that. Should this policy be also complemented by a single security and defense policy. Because this is an issue of European identity, the identity of its European institutions. What do you think about that? Do you think Europe is going to pursue the path towards a greater role, a greater contribution to world security, or is it going to rely upon NATO? Well, I risk disillusioning you, but I do not believe much in the idea of one single defense system of Europe, and I'm going to explain why. I'm talking to you Russians right now, and I have to say that your grandparents, your forefathers, paid a heavy price for the protection of your fatherland. If the citizens of the country are not willing to die, to sacrifice their lives for your country, you should not expect citizens of other countries to die for yours. It's very difficult for a president of the French Republic to send young French soldiers to die, to perish, to protect strategic interests of France or international interests as part of the mandate provided by the United Nations. And I don't think that the president of one country can make or order citizens, young soldiers of other country, to die for his. Yes, I believe in information exchange. I believe in one single defense industry of Europe. Well, for instance, France has nuclear power. If to use nuclear power you've got to get authorization from the European Union, then France is going to be swept off the map even before it has a chance to retaliate. In other words, I do not believe much in one single defense system. Yes, I believe in integration, in cooperation, but I do not believe in one single policy. Now, as for monetary policy, we've seen enormous developments over the recent years. We see negative interest rates. Sometimes you've got to pay to put money on your deposit in a bank, that is. But right now that interest rates are in the negative, the issues of budget deficit, for instance, and sovereign debt are absolutely changed. And right now, the question we see is not that of a growing debt, but the use of money. And let's take such projects as big Moscow or Greater Paris. These are huge projects, so we have to use these low interest rates to build infrastructure. Once interest rates get back, it'll give us a chance to get back the money which are going to pay for this investment.
This is why the 3% limit or taboo today has lost much of its meaning or any common sense. When a poor person would buy a flat, he would borrow money at 17%. Back in the 2070s, France had the 25% per annum inflation back then. So the monetary policies and the concept of buying debt bonds have been fluctuating over the years. So the negative rate is explained, the current negative rate is explained by the fact that we, for a long time, had more money than than goods. And when the '08 downturn struck, and I know it quite well, the bankers have separated the process of money supply and the loan origination. So the money supply, as a matter of fact, as a result, increased 16 times, and today we cannot have a similar idea of the debt obligations to the one that we had 10 years ago. And I marvel at the fact that economists and professionals in the economy and economics don't see that. It's a change in paradigm. Thank you. It is a very important point. I accepted being an economist, but being an economic historian, I must say that only economic historians know the truth, including those economic historians that are in future. They will tell you later on why something worked well or failed, and today we don't know exactly which is the correct measure and which is an erroneous measure. And we had lots of debates with international scholars and our economic development minister about how to raise the economic growth rates. And now the new monetary theory is spelling out that you can borrow for good infinitely. It's quite a popular concept today. Our generation believes that inflation is a bad thing, and back in 2070s and in 1990s, we all spoke about how to bring down the inflation, and now over the past 20 years, everybody seeks to stimulate inflation, and to bring inflation down seems easier than to heat it up. So economy is always called, and economics is always called a sad science, because low rates are bad and high rates are bad. It's a lose-lose situation for some of the scholars. But anyway, all of that makes economists quite relevant, because there is always a need for economic advice. So now the economists have started saying that over the past 10 years of sustainable development, though at a low pace, our world is nearing an economic crisis or downturn. You know, predicting a crisis is an easy thing, because it's like predicting a rain, because it's gonna rain sooner or later. So the crisis, similarly, would strike sooner or later. So are we now approaching formidable economic turbulence in near future or not, or can we be at ease at this point of time? Still, most importantly, I must say I'm not an economist. This is why I've been asking you this question, because it's no use asking the economists. Exactly. Economists with very formidable countenance can explain why something happened 30 years ago, but they cannot predict what will happen in 3 days, because for that common sense is needed. My second comment would be as follows. In Japan, the public debt is 230% of GDP, but is the economy of Japan backwarded? Is it the last economic power in the world? No. So my third comment, let's take two couples, young couples, Russians. One couple works a lot and they decide to borrow money, borrow a mortgage and buy a flat. The other couple like whooping it up. They spree all the money and splurge the money. They go to the Seychelles Islands. So which of the two couples is more reasonable? The one that buys a flat assuming lots of debt, or the one that spends money? Definitely those that buy a flat are more reasonable, though they increase their debt. And the third comment of mine, will there be a crisis shortly? Yes. My answer is yes. The trees cannot grow endlessly and reach the sky. The cycle, and with the oscillations and ups and downs, is now coming for the second year in a row, is looking down, is approaching the downside. But the question is not about whether there will be a crisis or not, but rather when there will be a crisis. There is no direct relationship between money supply and wealth creation, and inflation is no longer in existence. But anyway, bubbles are observed in some of the sectors of the economy, some of the industries of the economy. The money is injected there artificially, it's all pumped up artificially, and money needs utilization. And this money supply will be used in some of the industries, and inflation will soar there. The prices there would go through the roof, like the dot-com or a bubble that happened in Brazil several years ago. So for me, there is the fact that there will be a short-term economic crisis is indisputable, because the bubble would burst. We haven't seen a single case in the economy of a bubble not bursting at the end of the day. So the global economy is not always coherent and consistent in its development, and a crisis is kinda purging or clearing the economy to level some of the things. I may be mistaken, but there can be no two opinions here. After the 2008 downturn, the global community has moved forward considerably, has made headway. But currently, the global community would repeat its old mistakes once again, and coming up with products no one is knowledgeable about. And probably the final question, as we are about to close the debate, but to end on a positive note, I would ask, Mr. President, are you an optimist? My answer is yes, I am. I was born an enthusiast. I was born into the world an agile optimist. But anyway, the current juncture pushes us to pessimism, because quite often life has a sad ending, but there is nothing better than life. And the only means to live properly, and this is a very short span, it merely began and it comes to an end. So the only means to live properly is to live as if there was eternity ahead, immortality ahead of us. All the trepidations and turbulence of human life would then seem pathetic and theoretical. But the agnosticism gives us dignity. Some ignorance gives us dignity. We may face a mortal microbe, a virus, in a second. Still, there are men and women that get up early and lead a full life and build their own future and think about that future. This is why human beings feel themselves good. I'm an optimist, yes. Is it reasonable? No, it is not. Mr. President, thank you so much. I'd like to welcome you for being here. I thank our old and good friend, Nicolas Sarkozy, for his speech and his answers, which has been philosophical and strategic and quite humane. Thank you. Thank all of you. I thank all of you, and I wish every success to the Russians.